Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Saturday, July 12th, 2:31 in the afternoon, and we are at the South Florida Conservative News Service, and we are talking about some BS that is perpetrating throughout the Western states in the form of this junior brown power, Cesar Chavez jerking each other off, fucking nonsense. That is the conquest movement or whatever you want to call it. So let's just talk about what it's all about here. We have what's called the mestizo divide. We got some deep bias and some political posturing. And we're going to talk about structural racism against the indigenous Mexicans, which is not what the junior Mexicans in the United States are talking about. You see a lot of these new TikTok, Instagram, all this other stuff about we were conquered and the conquistadors and all this kind of stuff. It's all this we were this and we were that and we were here first. It's not true. Absolutely not true. And you say, how can you say that? These Mexicans have been kicking around below the border for quite some time. No, they have not, because these are not, when you want to talk as socialism should, because they're all about race and power and this and that. The real deal is not what they are telling you, okay? Because Mexico, if you see their president, Ms. Sheinbaum, she is a perfect example of the average Mexican that you're going to meet. Mexico is a stratified society, stratified by race and class, despite the narrative of this harmonious mestizaje, racial mixing. A 2025 study by the Centro de Estudios Espinosa Iglesias highlights stark disparities. 57% of dark-skinned individuals and 62% of dark-skinned indigenous women are trapped in poverty, compared to 34% of the lighter-skinned Mexicans. Light-skinned Mexicans are a mix of Spanish, somebody else, a little bit of Indian, whatever. They either use a word like Creole, which is just to be clever, or mestizo, which means you're not really Spanish, you're a mix of Spanish and Indian and whoever else fell down the rain pipe, as we say. The indigenous Mexicans, which are the Indian tribes, 57%, 62% trapped in poverty. All right. Historical and modern research will confirm this for you. Indigenous or dark-skinned Mexicans, the little Aztec warriors, you know who they are, usually exemplified in our community by the Guatemalans more than the actual Mexicans. Mexicans earn, those little guys earn significantly less, receive a poorer education, and face systemic labor market discrimination. On average, 45.5% lower wages than non-indigenous groups, i.e., the assholes running around in Los Angeles, rolling their R's and pretending that they are part of La Raza, right? The National Discriminatory Service, which is done by a group called ENADIS, ENADIS, and was put out in 2017, report that over 40% of indigenous Mexicans, the ones who were supposedly land that we've conquered, have experienced discrimination in healthcare, education, and in public spaces. Everything I'm telling you about the discrimination has occurred in Mexico by these other Mexicans upon the Mexican Indians. Now, we're not talking about the United States here. We're talking about everything I'm telling you is occurring in Mexico as we speak, not by the ICE agents, not by El Diablo Trump, nada. It's all been done in Mexico. So, despite nominal, and I mean nominal, constitutional protections, indigenous Mexicans are routinely excluded from civic life and upward mobility. They're denied medical care. There is domestic prejudice against them that is no different than during the colonial era caste hierarchies. When you hear about the doubloons and the quatroons and the octroons, that's how much blood, what blood do you have in you, right? So then you get to hear this nonsense shit coming out of Los Angeles. And excuse my profanity, but I am quite sick of all this, having worked in these countries and understand the racism that occurs in Central and South America, and especially in Ciudad, Mexico. What a bunch of effing liars. Meanwhile, President Sheinbaum, who is dark as a fucking night, as you've seen, and associated socialist voices denounce California, Arizona, and Texas as colonial steals. They have been stolen from, the people. They champion imaginary rights of modern Mexicans to reclaim these territories under the banners of anti-imperialism. President Sheinbaum has been on television and in the news actively telling Mexicans in the United States that are illegal to resist ICE forces. She is this far from getting hit by a truck, as far as I'm concerned. Okay? So, but look at what we're talking about. We are not talking about, now I'm going to butcher these names because these are indigenous tribes. The Puripecha or the Zapotec. The Zapotecas, right? Or any other authentic indigenous group. Rather, the people who are running their mouths are what they're either called Creole or Criollo, Mestizo. These are the elites. They're descended from the Spanish colonizers who didn't bring women with them, so they had to either go with the Indians. There's some black going on in there, depending on where you are. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And they are saying that they are telling Mexico's true indigenous that they, the mestizos, have a special right to own the United States. These same elites who dominate the Mexican state and education are complicit in suppressing, to this day, native voices and denying indigenous autonomy at home. There was, if you remember the telenovelas, a number of years ago, there was a strike in the domestic servant business because they wanted the Indians, right, to be portrayed as anything other than landscapers and maids. There had been slightly darker Indian-looking people in the telenovela, but they had bit parts. They didn't really speak, and they were the maid, they were the gardener, they were this other bullshit, and the very European-looking ones were the bosses. And it had gotten so bad, I think it was Telemundo, could be wrong, a show called Clase 406, where they went as far as to go get a French girl whose father was Spanish or something. She spoke fluent Spanish. She was actually French, white as you can get, blonde hair, blue eyes, and had her on the show instead of getting a local girl to be on there herself. But that's also where Salma Hayek comes from. She was a telenovela girl. So anyway, this is what we're talking about. We have a group, right? The rhetoric that they have abroad is they are claiming sovereignty over Aztlán, right? Which is California and everything else. In reality, at home, they are denying the indigenous people education, health services, the whole bit. Prenatal care goes out the door. Infant mortality among the Indians is incredibly high. They get no dental care. Seriously. And then the one thing, again, they're fighting Western imperialism, right? The brown beret, viva la raza, all this bullshit. When they're at home, they're enforcing a strict racial caste hierarchy, right? Very serious, especially, like I said, go to Mexico City and look around certain neighborhoods, or you'll know where you are by who you see. When the third one would be when they're promoting an indigenous revival. They are doing no such thing. They are pushing assimilation via this mestizaje, race mixing, and Indian, what is it? Whatever the word is. Indigenous policies. But I was trying to remember the Spanish. I'm sorry, I can't do it. This is a cynical double standard. I mean, talk about cultural appropriation or cultural misappropriation. This is worse than Bo Derek and wearing the cornrows. Okay, they are decrying colonialism abroad, while they are practicing modern colonialism, which is cultural erasure, racial subjugation, etc., within Mexico's borders. Let's use the same words as the socialist Jews. They are crushing the Indians. They are making them not exist. If they don't exist on paper, they don't exist in real life. It is easier to sit and ignore them while they die than to actively go do something about it. So, who is the real colonizer in all this, right? Who is the real colonizer? Call the bluff of these socialist scumbags. The Creole and Mestizo elites embodied in somebody like Sheinbaum, embodied in the various TikTok cultural influence, toxicas and tortas and all this kind of shit, right? They are a historically constructed indigenous group. They are not. They are the ultimate of the colonizer. These are the people who bred out the original people, right? Say what they want about the Yankees. You didn't hear about that much of it going on with the Indians. Central, South America, and Mexico, see. Okay? So they're going to then, they've done that. They're going to say that they are the indigenous people, not the old Aztecas or any of these guys, right? And it is a top-down state project celebrating sanitized indigenous symbols. Like I said, the Aztec warrior, right? While continuing to assimilate or suppress the real indigenous people. These guys couldn't get a job to save their life. They are below regular working class poverty, all right? Scheinbaum's Reconquista is what it's called. Messaging is ideological theater. It's designed to exploit ethnic identity for radical political ends while doing nothing to empower actual indigenous communities. Those people pushing the notions of Mexicans owning U.S. territory are the very group that continues to oppress indigenous Mexicans at home and kick around some of our Indians when they get the opportunity too. They are hypocrites, okay? So this whole deal is the offensive that is being launched while we are trying to straighten out our immigration policy. I'll talk about Scheinbaum's real deal in another video we'll probably get to later on today or tomorrow. But it is all part of a well-staged, managed approach. It is a soft punch to the stomach because they know that we are coming. The president has already said we are going to deal with the cartels, and surprisingly, they struck first. They're sitting there on these interviews saying, "You'll know when we hit you. You'll know when we hit you." They're already hitting us. They've been poisoning us with drugs for how long now, right? They're doing this shit up in Los Angeles. These are attacks. They're not waiting to hit you. They're hitting you light, and then they're going to get in there and give you a good shot. All right. So when these guys are sitting there about how great it is, and they're going to free up all this colonial property, ask them, hey, do you even know what one of these Indians looks like? Do you even know what the term economic marginalization means? Educational exclusion, outright racism. I heard of them pushing them away from the free dental care places down there because they're like, we aren't taking you sons of bitches in here, right? Healthcare inaccessibility for indigenous citizens, it is a fact of life. You can complain about what happens on the Indian reservation in the United States, but I'll tell you what, no European says that they were there before the Indians. Very rarely would you hear that fantasy story unless you're a Viking, right? So this real fight isn't for sovereignty. It's to obscure and exploit real racism in Mexico for nationalist or political gain, however you want to look at it. We aim for authentic justice for both the Mexicans and the Americans. We must expose this hypocrisy and demand that any claim to indigenous rights in the U.S. roots themselves in genuine solidarity with Mexico's oppressed indigenous peoples, not this hollow claim of some mestizo elite slash kid who rolls his R's on Thursday night when he's out at Taco Bell. It is embarrassing to everybody involved. It is dangerous to the Americans. And it's going to be dangerous to some of these kids who, if you've noticed, are now throwing rocks. One guy was following the ICE truck with his car and he hitting the horn and he got pulled over and he wonders why, someone's going to get smoked. And then they're going to really cry. And then it's going to get ugly. And then it's going to get uglier. But in the end, you guys are doing the wrong thing. This is not your land. If you're an American citizen who is of Mexican origin and you've decided to switch sides, there is a website for you to go to over at the U.S. State Department where you can surrender your citizenship. Surrender your U.S. citizenship if you have your Mexican citizenship. Sheinbaum has already asked you to come home, which is a bunch of shit because the largest influx of cash into Mexico, bar none, except for the narcotics, which isn't tracked, is people from Mexico working in the United States and sending their money back to Mexico. She says that knowing that nobody in their right mind is going to go back to that kind of oppression. Right? Yeah, come on back. So those of you who want to live La Raza, who want to be a big deal, who hate the Americans who have given you everything, because if you would go back and go on Mexicare, you're not going to have shit. Do yourselves a favor, surrender your citizenship. Become a true son of the Aztec Empire or daughter, and we will all feel better about life. And tell me how you make out. I would be really interested in seeing that. So that's all we have for today. Vaya con Dios, pendejos. And that's till next time.